What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. I'm Casey Hendrickson. I want to thank you for joining us in the SilverFoxArt.com studios. And before we get started, I want to tell you about SilverFoxArt.com and the amazing giveaway that we're doing that is sponsored by them. If you go into my channel on Rumble, then you will be able to go ahead and subscribe and enter to win the contest. All you have to do is go to subscriber giveaway, that video there. If you're a subscriber, you just scroll down to the bottom and you comment. Looks like I have like 27, 28 submissions already, and you will be entered to win this piece right here, Usurper of the United States of America. This is the Usurper-in-Chief seal that was made custom by SilverFoxArt.com. Definitely check it out. It is made out of 3/4-inch wood. It is full-colored. It's got all of the stuff to hang it up on a wall and everything else. Fantastic piece. Absolutely awesome. You can go watch that video after we're done here, and you can enter to win that contest for free just because you're a subscriber on Rumble. If you're watching on YouTube right now, please use the link in the description below to go to Rumble and subscribe on Rumble, my primary video platform. And again, we do the live stream of the radio show on 95.3 MNC every single day from 3 until 6 Eastern time. All right, let's get into this. So, the Russian military officials have shifted their rhetoric. According to the army, they're now focused on liberation of the eastern Ukrainian regions. This is Radio Free Europe. Radio Free Europe is the American, I guess you'd call it the propaganda type thing in Europe. It's been around in Europe for decades. And they do good work, don't get me wrong, but it is technically, pro-U.S., pro-West propaganda. And a lot of what they do, by the way, you should actually be subscribed to them because a lot of what they do is really, really good work. But you have to understand that it comes with a bias, okay? So as long as you're aware of that and you can filter that, you're okay. But this is important because I've talked about this a couple of times here, okay? The mission in Ukraine was always securing Donbass's independence. That's what it was always about in Russia. I know that you had a bunch of talking heads and, so-called experts and things like that going on cable news and telling you this is about Putin wanting to rebuild the entire Soviet Union, and once Ukraine falls, he's going to go after Poland, he's going to do this. That was never the case. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. There's no indication of that. Even Putin himself has said, even going back to February, before the war broke out, even Putin himself said, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to attack the European Union or NATO. I know that I can't compete with them, but I do have a big red button. That's basically what he said. He understands what Russia's military power versus NATO is, and Russia's at a huge disadvantage. He understands that. Everybody knows that. He's not trying to pick a fight with the European Union or with NATO. And so it never was about any of that. I've explained this quite a bit, the history of all of this, why the Russians feel the need to kind of bring Ukraine back into the fold. This has always been about healing the national psyche of Russia. Ukraine and Little Russia, which is Belarus, they want to be brought back into the family because they're the traditional Russian Empire things. The problem is that the Ukrainians, particularly in the West, really hate Russia. In the East, they're very pro-Russia, but in the West, they don't like Russia. And they haven't liked Russia for a very long time, and with good reason. So there is, unfortunately, a disconnect with the West and what's actually happening there and what is being espoused. They've made it all about, Putin is basically Stalin and Hitler and all of that stuff. That's not what's going on at all. If you're unfamiliar with what started this conflict, there's two regions in the East, okay? We'll call it the Donbass region, and there's two cities with surrounding territories that declared their independence after the Civil War in 2014. They didn't like that it was that Ukraine was moving pro-Western and moving away from Russia, so they declared their independence. They did so in a way that doesn't necessarily comport with Ukrainian law. They held a vote. It's just that it wasn't Ukrainian law. It wasn't legal, okay? So they did it. The Ukrainian government said that wasn't a legitimate vote. We don't recognize your independence, and that civil war started. And there has been horrendous war crimes committed by both sides. But in particular, there's a lot of war crimes that have been committed by the Ukrainian government, okay? Most of this happened under the previous president, Poroshenko. Zelensky was obviously elected as a reformer to deal with the corruption in the Ukrainian government, but also to try and heal that divide between Ukraine, Donbass, and Russia. He failed at it miserably. Putin saw weakness in Zelensky, and Putin made his move. Once he had a weak American administration, he knew that he could move on Zelensky. That's what he did. Did he underestimate Zelensky? Yes, he did. But that's where he saw weakness there. But this conflict was always about Donbass, okay, and these two city-states that were in the Donbass region. So what we have is Donbass declaring their independence and Russia acknowledging their independence and Russia moving military forces into Donbass to secure those two regions and protect them from the Ukrainian government because they are now recognizing their independence. Russia's produced documents at the United Nations that shows that there was going to be a planned offensive by the Ukrainian government against Donbass to retake those territories, and that is what launched the special operation that Vladimir Putin launched, which we now know as the war in Ukraine. The goal was always to secure the independence of the Donbass region from Ukraine and to demilitarize the Ukrainian military so they could not launch an offensive against Donbass. That was always the primary objective of this operation. The problem is that the secondary objective was to take Kyiv and replace Zelensky's government. That's the one that didn't pan out for the Russians, okay? They have secured their primary objectives, right? So the Donbass region is secured. Mariupol is now officially under control of the Russian military. That happened last night, according to the mayor. And you basically have the Russians securing those eastern territories that were their primary objective. So the Russian military, even though they paid a very heavy price, did not go as easy as they thought. They certainly were exposed. The Ukrainians fought very well. And I told you when this conflict broke out, I said, keep an eye on the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army is not a pushover. They're a very good force. So that ended up playing out exactly how I saw it would play out. A lot of veterans were warning you about that, but the Russian military certainly struggled trying to get into Kyiv. They never did have the forces to invade all of Ukraine. I don't know why they thought they did. It made absolutely no sense. First of all, you were going up with a numerically similar force. Okay, they both had right around 200,000 men. The Ukrainian military has been trained up by the West, particularly the United States, over the past several years very, very well. And their reserve forces, their little national guards, their provincial police forces are not very well supplied, but their standard forces really are. And that has been shown to play out. So the Russians, unfortunately, bit off more than they could chew by trying to get to Kyiv and replace Zelensky. That's the problem. But their primary objectives have all been secured. Their secondary objective was a miserable failure. So the Russians now are focusing on just securing the liberation of Donbass and protecting Donbass from any offensive from the Ukraine. That's kind of where we're at right now. But Western media is basically saying, ha, 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 the Russians are changing their attitudes. No, this is always the stated goal. Everything that the Russian military has been saying about the Donbass region is 100% accurate. It's the same story that they've been giving us since February. This was always their primary objective. Kyiv and replacing Zelensky were the secondary objective. They totally failed at that. The Ukrainians prevented them from doing that. There's no doubt that that was a defeat for the Russians, but the Russians did secure victory by protecting Donbass. There is some reports, although I've seen this go back and forth over the past couple of days, that Zelensky is willing to compromise on what's happening in Donbass in order to end the war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Sunday that he is willing to compromise with Russia on the Donbass region because to try to force Russian forces completely from Ukraine would lead to World War III, according to Reuters. And I'll be perfectly honest, I don't think the Ukrainians can force the Russians out of Donbass. I really don't. And I know that some people are like, well, they've forced them out of Kyiv. Kyiv is a very different situation. There's logistical issues. There's certainly the Russian air support situation has not been very good. Russians will have air support, and they will be able to conduct air operations from Russia in Donbass. Okay, so there's going to be some serious issues trying to expel the Russians from Donbass. And since 2014, the Ukrainians haven't been able to get Donbass under control anyway. And the forces in Donbass, the DPR and LPR, have done very, very good at protecting their territory from the Ukrainian military. And the Ukrainian militaries continue to commit war crimes there. DPR and LPR forces have continued, particularly DPR, have continued to commit war crimes there as well. So we're dealing with no innocent side here. And that's the important thing that everybody needs to understand. That's really been my objective in talking about this conflict. There are no innocent sides here except for the civilians in Ukraine who have nothing to do with this conflict. They're the only innocent parties in the entire thing, okay? The Ukrainian government is not innocent. Zelensky is not innocent. The Russians are not innocent. Donbass, the two provisional governments there, they're not innocent. There's no innocent party here except for the civilians in Ukraine who are suffering as a result of this war. So we've got this, and this has always been the thing. You know, if Ukraine could let Donbass go, there probably wouldn't have been a war. Ukraine wouldn't let Donbass go. I can understand the reasonings for that, but let's be honest, they invited a conflict by trying to hold on to territories that say that they don't want to be a part of Ukraine anymore. Now, that's a very complicated situation. I understand that, but I'm just giving you the lowdown of what actually is happening since nobody in the news media is telling you about any of this. So anyway, the stunning reported development came as Ukraine's top military intelligence officer said that he believes Russia is backing off taking the country's capital of Kyiv to instead focus on the southern and eastern portions of the country to try to split the nation in two. Not necessarily. Russia obviously wanted Crimea for their own selfish reasons. They took Crimea. Donbass wants to leave Ukraine and join Russia, and Russia is now offering them their independence. They'll be independent for a little bit. Once everybody kind of recognizes that, they'll then submit to become part of Russia and be absorbed. In the midst of all this, I've been highlighting for all of you that Ukraine has committed a lot of war crimes. Yes, the Russians have committed some war crimes as well. A lot of the war crimes that you hear in the West that are committed by Russian troops, not actually war crimes, but I digress. And we'll get into one of those in just a second. But Ukraine has been committing war crimes. I've told you I've been watching these videos. I haven't shown them to you. I'm not going to show them to you. If you are interested at all in hearing about the real history of what's been happening in the Donbass area, and particularly the city of Mariupol, which is all over the news, Americans know about this city now. Lots of lies in Western media about Mariupol, okay? Azov, the Ukrainian neo-Nazi National Guard unit there, has been committing war crimes in Mariupol since 2014. The Ukrainian government has been using airstrikes on civilian populations in Mariupol. They've been using artillery strikes on civilian populations in Mariupol since 2014. So all of that has been ignored by Western media. They have completely erased that fact from history. And it is important that you understand that there's a lot of people in Mariupol who do not at all want the Ukrainians around, okay? They are happy that the Russians got involved, and they do not want to be a part of Ukraine because of the war crimes that Ukraine has been committing. Now, most of that, again, happened under Poroshenko, but some of it did happen under Zelensky, and Zelensky didn't get a handle on the situation. So Ukraine will probe some of these videos now that have been leaking out, and there's lots of them that have been leaking out where Russian POWs are being tortured and murdered. And Azov has been publishing actively that they've been doing this. And Azov, again, neo-Nazi regiment in the Ukrainian National Guard. So they're the ones that have been doing a lot of the abuse. Ukraine says that they're going to look into that. I don't believe for a second that they actually will. But these are obviously some disturbing images. I'm scrolling fast, so you don't really, see everything. But the reality of the situation is that there have been war crimes committed against Russians too. And if you want to just do a tit for tat on who started war crimes, Ukraine wins that one. Okay. Ukraine committed war crimes in Donbass. Donbass committed war crimes in Ukraine. And as those war crimes continued, Russia kept saying, look, if this continues, we're going to step in here and protect the people of Donbass. They continued. Russia stepped in. Okay, that's the Russian perspective now. Now, there are obviously some people on the West who say that the rhetoric has been amped up and the Russians have called it genocide. There's no real evidence of it being genocide. And so that's been kind of like the plausible deniability talking point in the West is that, well, there's no evidence of actual genocide in Donbass. And they're correct, there isn't. But there's a clear and undeniable history of war crimes by the Ukrainian government against the people of Donbass. And the Russians have used that as an excuse to come in. And they've kind of amplified what has actually happened. They've made it seem worse than it really is. They've made the whole neo-Nazi situation seem worse than it really is. And they've used that as justification for the broader conflict. But at least Ukraine is acknowledging that there are accusations against their forces now, which is something that we have not seen before. Now, let me pull this up. This is something that I wanted to show everybody because this is one thing, it's driving me nuts on American media, that there's like, oh, the Russians are attacking this apartment building, and that famous video of the tank in Mariupol shooting the apartment building. What they don't show you is the first part of that video where that tank was hit from the apartment building. They cut that part off, and then they show you the rest of the video. But this is in Mariupol, okay? This comes from a pro-Ukraine account on Instagram, and this story is now blowing up because the footage is very compelling, but I want you to see this, okay? Here we go. All right. All right. So there you go. All right. Now, what does this look like? What does that look like? What does this look like? This is in Mariupol. All right. This is the same city that Azov operates in and Azov has committed war crimes in. This is the same city that there are tons of videos being uploaded by the pro-Ukraine side that shows them firing at tanks from residential buildings. And then what happens is that tank turn around, fire at this building, and these guys who fired the, I don't know if it was an RPG or what, these guys who fired at that tank will run to the news media in the West and go, they're attacking civilians in apartment buildings, but you just attacked the tank from an apartment building. See, as I've told you before, the Western media has really done a disservice to their audiences by going out there and saying, look, all of these civilians are arming themselves and they're getting training and the civilians are rising up and resisting the Russian invaders, which, for the record, I applaud. But when civilians arm themselves and actively fight against an invader, they're no longer civilians. They are combatants. And the Russians have a right to defend themselves in that space, okay? And they will defend themselves in that space. I shouldn't say have a right to because, technically invasion, illegal, whatever. But you get what I'm saying, okay? They're an active combatant, and you can't expect the Russians to not defend themselves against an active combatant, especially when the active combatant is fighting from residential neighborhoods and residential buildings. So this is evidence that in Mariupol, the Ukrainian forces are attacking Russian forces from residential buildings. And as a result, Russian forces will attack the buildings that they are being attacked from. This is basic warfare. If you tell an invading army they can't attack this apartment building and that army is going to respect that, where do you think all of the enemy are going to gather? They're going to gather in that apartment building and they're going to attack and try and force the international media to cover a war crime when the Russians actually do respond from the forces that are attacking them. As I've said before, the Ukrainians, and again, I don't blame them, but the Ukrainians are using Palestinian tactics here, and they're using it very effectively. So now we have this, okay? So we've got the refugee situation. This is in Ireland. This is outside of the airport in Dublin. Dublin's an amazing city. I actually could comfortably live in Dublin. I prefer Belfast, but I could comfortably move my family to Dublin and be very, very happy. If I were single, I would be in Belfast, but Dublin's a better family place if you ask me. And this is outside of the airport. So this is, this is an Irish journalist. He's going up there and he's noticing some of these Ukrainian refugees. Now, I don't know if you've seen the news reports, but the news reports show that the Ukrainian refugees, there's about a third of them aren't Ukrainian at all. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Ukrainians tend to be white. It's a thing. So this is a reporter in Ireland, okay? I want to thank Paul Joseph Watson for publishing this video on his website, Summit News. And this is him going up to some of the Ukrainian refugees that are arriving in Dublin, Ireland, as refugees from the conflict in Ukraine.
Ask you a few questions. You've arrived.
Yes.
You've arrived here at the refugee center here.
That's
For Ukraine, yeah.
Yes, sir. Ukraine.
Are you Ukrainians?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
And you flew in from
From Ukraine.
From Ukraine.
from Ukraine.
Okay.
Yep. Sure.
From
Donetsk.
Okay.
Donetsk. City Donetsk.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you don't mind me saying so, you don't look like you're from
Okay.
Ukraine.
No.
Mhm.
We just national of Ukraine.
You're just nationals of Ukraine passport. Okay.
Yeah,
So you're Ukrainian citizen
Yeah.
Okay.
Ukrainian city by origin. We are from State Jammu Kashmir.
from Kashmir.
Yes.
Ah.
Yes.
Okay. Indian. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Now, I believe that he said that, if I understood him correctly, that they flew in from the city of Donetsk. Well, that is in Donbass. That's the DPR, okay? They're pro-Russia. The DPR is fighting against the Ukrainian government alongside the Russian military, and they're very active in the city of Mariupol, actually. So you've got some Indians from Kashmir who are claiming to be Ukrainian refugees, using the Ukrainian refugee program to get to Ireland, where they claim that they flew into Ireland as Ukrainian refugees from the city of Donetsk, which is in the DPR, which is in Donbass, which is fighting against the Ukrainian government. I think he might be lying. Just like with the Syrian migrant issue, because it wasn't a refugee issue, it was a migrant issue. Now, with the Syrian thing, most of the Syrian migrants were not Syrian. Right about a third or so of the Ukrainian refugees are actually migrants. They're not from Ukraine. They're not from Ukraine at all. Is this the video that has the other one in it? I'm just wondering. No, this one doesn't have the other one in it. There's one other video that has like an hysterical example of this. Hold on and see if this is... I forgot to get this other one here. There's another one where, well, I'll just tell you what it is. There's another one where there was a black woman from Africa, and she was claiming to be a Ukrainian refugee, and she gave the ID, okay? She gave the ID of the Ukrainian person she stole the identity from. The Ukrainian person she stole the identity from is a white blonde woman, but this is a black African woman pretending to be a Ukrainian refugee. Now, the other thing that we have to address is the foreign fighters, okay? News media really puffed up the foreign fighter thing, and this is the thing. I know I've kind of made fun of him on my show and everything else. Most of you know I'm a veteran, and there's a lot of veterans who did. They perked up, and they're like, hey, depending on how this thing goes, we might be willing to lend our services to the nation of Ukraine. And a lot of American and British veterans did, particularly the Tier 1, Tier 2 operators who really know how to conduct a war like this. They have gone to Ukraine, and they have trained Ukrainian civilians. They've trained Ukrainian forces. They've conducted operations. Word on the street, totally unconfirmed, word on the street is that the landing ship, the Russian naval landing ship Orsk, which was destroyed the other day, that was an operation carried out by Americans who were there. I don't know if that's true. There is no accurate information on any of that. But we do know that American and British former special forces are operating inside of Ukraine. We do know that. We also know that, some Marines, some Rangers, and things like that were doing some of the training of the civilians. That we've seen that footage and those interviews and that sort of thing. So we do know that it is certainly happening. But there's this other element. There's these people who wouldn't serve in the American military, who would not fly an American flag, who all of a sudden are going to become Rambo, and they're going to fly across the world, and they're going to go fight in Ukraine because the Russians are weak, and ha, ha, ha. And that's part of the propaganda that's been happening here. The Russians have performed fairly well in some areas. The areas they haven't performed well are areas where, frankly, their leaders have failed them. It's not because of the lack of capability. There's some anger amongst Russian troops that they were lied to. A lot of them don't want to be at war with Ukraine. Again, Russians view Ukrainians as their brothers. And so there's some emotional conflict that is happening here with a lot of these troops, and they don't want to be there fighting the Ukraine because there is no reason for them to fight Ukraine. But I wanted to go over just some of this stuff. Paul Joseph Watson did a really good job of kind of like breaking down what's been happening. I've done some of this on my radio show. I haven't done a lot of it, but I've done some of it. But I wanted to just go a little bit by bit here as Paul Joseph Watson. I'm not going to do the entire 8 minutes of him just kind of highlighting some of these stories and me kind of explaining some of the nuances of it.
When the media ran that PR campaign encouraging foreign volunteers to go and fight in Ukraine.
16,000 foreigners have joined in the fight on the ground in Ukraine. Over the weekend, President Zelensky called non-Ukrainians to come fight to defend Europe and the world, as he put it.
Let's check in on how that's working out.
Spoiler
alert.
Not so well.
Not very well. Of course, some of those volunteers, the ones with actual military experience, went to fight well prepared and with good intentions. But let's be honest, a lot of keyboard warriors made the trip with very different intentions. Get to the border, take a few selfies for Twitter dopamine, Instagram likes and Reddit upvotes, then get the hell out of there. We've seen this kind of moral exhibitionism already backfire in another sense. A third of Ukrainian refugees aren't coming from Ukraine. People are commendably opening up their homes to Ukrainian refugees. But when they arrive, getting, let's just say, not what they expected.
Okay. Hold on.
But when they arrive, getting, let's just say...
Okay. Those are Ukrainian refugees in this guy's house. Ukrainian refugees in this guy's house. This is the video. Okay, hold on.
Not what they expected. Whoops.
Okay. That's the Ukrainian ID. That's the Ukrainian girl that I was talking about just a minute ago.
D'accord, ok. Donc ça, vous me dites que c'est vous? D'accord, ok.
Yes, this is me. Yeah, this is me. How long ago was this you?
Il y a longtemps? Ah oui,
oh, very long time. Like 10 years ago.
Il y a très longtemps.
Oops, and now for the volunteer foreign fighters. When this guy went public with what was really happening to many foreign volunteers, the media ran hit pieces smearing him as a right-wing boogaloo boy who just got scared and ran home. But it turns out he was telling the truth.
Our base got fucked up. The base right next to us got fucked up. Americans, British, tons of British dead. They're trying to send us to Kiev with no fucking weapons, no kit, no fucking plates. So they told us we had to get the fuck out of there. They were going to shoot us in the back. When you get to the border, anyone who has kit, anyone who has any military shit, they're fucking pulling you out of the line and they're sending you back to the front. People need to stop coming here. It's a trap, and they're not letting you fucking leave.
Presumably keen on feeding more Western dopamine addicts into the Ukrainian meat grinder, the media demonized the guy as a phony. But his story is echoed by others who made the trip.
Now, they also called him basically a Russian plant, okay? Typical smear that a lot of people are getting over the past several years. If you say anything that goes against any narrative, you're, Putin's stooge. And his story is echoed by a lot of people, okay? I've been talking about this before on the radio show. But, this is a guy who's apparently got some military experience, right? He gets there. And he's saying, look, if you've got any kit, they're pulling you out. They're sending you to the front. Now, this is a win-win situation for Ukraine because Ukraine gets these foreign fighters and they can use them as cannon fodder against the Russians, right? If the foreign fighters work, great, the foreign fighters work. If they don't work, Ukrainians didn't die. They preserve their forces and they get to run to the media of the West and go, the Russians have killed a bunch of Americans and British. And then Western media will go, oh my God, Vladimir Putin sucks. And then it'll turn into a whole propaganda campaign. So it's a win-win for Ukraine to use them as cannon fodder.
Namely that foreigners who show up in Ukraine are being treated like cannon fodder, having their passports ripped up and totally ill-prepared being sent direct to the front line.
Now, there are plenty of stories out there about how Ukraine are sending their own teenagers with 3 days training to the front. So this is not outside of the realm of possibility. We've heard this from several people who have gone over there. Again, some of them have military experience, but a lot of them don't. A lot of them are just trying to get social credit and clout, okay? That's what they're trying to do. And they don't understand what a real conflict is like. They get there, and all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh, this is not Call of Duty. This is not at all what I expected. And when you talk to any veteran, they'll tell you, man, the moment you actually get into a situation where there's real threat, all of those preconceived notions of heroism and all that stuff just goes right out the window. It is a completely different ballgame. And there's a lot of these, frankly, young people, some of them are kids, young people who just, they want to be heroes. Remember the old line, the old saying that every man thinks less of himself for having not been a soldier? Yeah. The problem is that these young people don't want to serve in the American military because they hate America. But they'll go over to Ukraine where all of the things that they don't like about the U.S. are amplified and much worse in Ukraine. Much worse in Ukraine. But they believe the propaganda and they just, they're basically, they're doing this. They're like the guy in college campus who plays guitar into the trees trying to get women. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to increase their appeal to the opposite sex and some grandiose vision of who they think they are. And they're not. They're just more keyboard warriors. So here we go.
And then being told under martial law they won't be able to go home until the war is over.
Heard that as
well. It could be weeks, or it could be years. Sky News reports that British man Ben Spann, with no military experience whatsoever, and without even telling his wife or teenage son, left for Ukraine, hopped up on media-contrived, sanctimonious grandstanding to, quote, join the resistance. He actually ended up trapped in a squalid safe house for 5 days, no toilets, no running water, having AK-47s pointed at his head by a Ukrainian SWAT team, then fled to Poland as soon as possible, having realised that he'd enrolled himself on a, quote, suicide mission.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that. Now, he goes on to talk about how the Ukrainian military are basically turning away some of these inexperienced people now because they don't have time to train them. They don't have the supplies, and they have to fight a conflict. And they're getting a little sick and tired of all of these people who are, would-be fake heroes who are just going over there with no experience whatsoever. I got news for you, and this is always kind of an interesting thing that kind of happens in like laser tag or paintball or whatever. You don't know how to fight a war. I get it. You wear camo and you carry a fake gun and you engage in movements, if you will, while you're playing airsoft or what have you. You don't know how to fight an actual war. And nobody has time to train you how to fight an actual war. They're trying to train their own citizens and they don't have the time to train you. And that's what's happening. So they're being told, hey, you're a waste of our time. Just leave. And the ones who do have some equipment, they're being immediately thrown to the front. There's an assumption if you have, any kit, any gear, there's an assumption there that you have some idea of what you're doing. You're being thrown to the front. I have not heard what the communication barrier is like here. So that's one aspect that I'm really interested in because I know that there's been some footage that have been released of some Americans that were in Ukraine. Their battle drill movements, terrible. So I'm assuming that they're not very experienced. But when you have a command structure that comes from Ukrainian, and most Americans don't speak Ukrainian, I wonder how that is being relayed to some of these foreign fighters who are there, with and without any experience. I don't know how that's working. When you join the French Foreign Legion, for example, you are expected to learn French while you're there. You don't have to learn French before you join the Foreign Legion, but you are expected to understand your orders in French by the time you are deployed, if you make it through training, okay? And there's actually a lot of people who join the Foreign Legion say that they didn't know any French until they got done with their Foreign Legion training, and then they could speak French. So you tend to pick it up pretty darn quick when you realize that you're going to be in big trouble if you don't learn it. So we will see how this all unfolds, but it's a giant mess. Now, the other news, too, is that if you want Ukrainian citizenship, you can go to Ukraine and fight, but you're probably not going to be able to leave. They're not letting any of the transgender Ukrainians. I know the CBS News did that whole transgender, Ukraine is not very trans-friendly. Well, yeah, I mean, most places acknowledge biology. The West, we're bored, and so we play games with stupid stuff. But over there, if you are a biological male, you're staying and you're fighting as if you're a biological male. You can't leave the country. Not how it works. It's like MASH, okay? You don't get to just change your clothing and decide all of a sudden that you're not going to be a combatant. It's not how it works. So they are forcing trans people who are biologically male to stay in the country and fight. I've heard the tearing up of passports and things like that there's martial law here. You are required to stay and fight. For those of you who do not know yet, if you are a Ukrainian male of fighting age, you're not allowed to leave. Which also calls back into question those guys. Because you're not allowed to leave. You are forced to stay and defend. And if you're forced to stay and defend, even if you don't want to defend, there's a good chance that you could end up hurt. But again, part of this, it's a win-win. They have more people now to defend certain areas, and if those people die, they get to run to Western media and go, Russians killed civilians, even though those civilians were not allowed to leave and were forced to stay and fight. All right, there's this other unconfirmed report that Ukraine and Russia peace negotiators were poisoned. I don't know if it's true. have no idea. They're circulating around that they were poisoned. Wall Street Journal picked up on a report from Dutch-based Bellingcat, which details how Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, thought to be a close confidant of Vladimir Putin, as well as at least 2 Ukrainian negotiators fell ill with symptoms of poisoning on the night of March 3rd, directly after holding peace negotiations. Now, of course, that's obviously been a long time ago. Maybe they don't know how to cook shrimp. I don't know, folks. I have no clue, no idea. But I'm just letting you know that it's out there, okay? But that's nearly a month old now. This is another BS story. Okay, there's a teacher in Texas who's claiming 20 fourth graders out of 32 students identify as LGBTQ. Bull. No. But this is why they so desperately want to sexualize your children at a young age, because they want to be able to artificially inflate their numbers. I talked about this a long time ago, okay? This is an old podcast of mine. I don't know, it's probably a year or two old, where I went off on parents who treat their kids as accessories. In that podcast, I addressed the issue of hormone therapies and things like that for children, allowing children to transition even before they are mature enough to understand what that means. And this is all designed to take a very, very, very small group, less than 1% of our population, transgender people, very, very small group of people, and artificially inflate their numbers. So once you start that transition as a young kid, there's no going back. There's no reversing it. You're forever destroyed. When you're an adult and you go through that transition, there is a possibility of getting some of that back depending on how far in the transition you go. When you're a child, you're ruined forever. So you will always be a part of that community, even if you don't want to be a part of that community. I've talked about this before. In the deaf community, there is actually a lot of opposition to cochlear ear implants. And the deaf community sees themselves as a culture. And I've watched some documentaries on this, found it very, very interesting. And parents who get cochlear implants for their children are ostracized by the deaf community because they're killing off their community, because there won't be any deaf people anymore. And there's this whole battle that is happening within the deaf community about, do we stay deaf or do we get the cochlear implants and fix our disability, eradicating our kind? And that is basically what is happening in, the trans community in particular, but certainly in the queer circles. The more people you can get to identify as LGBTQ, the better lobbying power you will have. The more people you force into the trans community against their will as children because their parents were looking to virtue signal and get clout in society, the more lobbying ability you will have. It is all designed to artificially inflate numbers. There is no way that 20 kids actually identify as LGBTQ. Now, here's the thing. Like when you're queer, okay, for those of you who don't know, and you're, bi or bi-curious, for those of you who don't know, you basically say that you're attracted to everybody, but you can say that you're attracted to everybody in order to easily fit into this, okay, or maybe even the bi-curious category of bi, and you never actually live that lifestyle because you're not interested in it for real. You're just telling people outwardly, I'm queer. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, he's hot. Yeah, cool. Yeah. I will never date a guy. I will only date women because I'm attracted to women. But he's totally, I'm queer. Yeah, that guy's awesome. But that's not a real thing. So what you're doing now is you're artificially manipulating people's minds, young children's minds, in order to make this a reality, but it isn't a reality. People, young millennials in particular, identify as a part of the LGBTQ community because they want to belong to a group. They will never live their life as one, ever. Very, very few people actually enter the real realm of LGBTQ. Okay, it just will not be something that is a majority in our society. It never will be. It never has been. It's just not something that's going to happen. But there will be people for the social clout who will say, yeah, I can totally identify as this one. Absolutely, sure. They'll never live their life that way because they're not really that way. But they will identify that way just so they can get some clout. And there will be parents who torture their children to get that. And that's the sad part. Your kids are not accessories. Your kids are not there to give you clout, to get you attention. They're your children, and you need to protect them. And so there is a massive movement. This is what parents are fighting against with some of the pornography in classrooms and things like that. Massive movement to artificially inflate these numbers by manipulating and grooming your kids at the youngest possible age. This is why this whole don't say gay thing is so important. Okay? First of all, Hollywood has a pedophile problem, and everybody knows that Hollywood has a pedophile problem. So anytime Hollywood sticks up for anything, okay, that may potentially damage kids in some way, shape, or form, you should immediately understand what is happening here, because Hollywood has always had a pedophile problem. And if you're going to sit there and look at three bimbos who go up on the Oscar stage and say, oh, for you people in Florida, we're going to have a gay time, gay, 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 gay. One, I'm super stoked that we get to say gay all the time now, because we were told we weren't allowed to call things gay. And now you can't tell me not to say gay because you're a bigot if you do that. So I get to say things are gay all the time, which I love. But beyond that, you should be very concerned, in spite of the fact that people in Hollywood are too dumb to even realize that they're making fools of themselves, because that bill in Florida has nothing to do with this. All it is, and I know that most of you know this, but all it is you're not going to teach sexuality from kindergarten to third grade. It doesn't matter if it is traditional or non-traditional. Doesn't matter. You're not teaching it because you're not going to groom children, period. Honestly, it should go beyond third grade, but, hey, that's a start. Take your victories. Kindergarten to third grade, we're not going to inject sex into the classroom because that's not appropriate for that age bracket, period, end of story. Anybody who's known anybody who's third grade or below knows this basic fundamental fact. So you have to ask yourself, why is it that there is such a concerted effort to go into 9, 10-year-old kids and less and sexualize them? What is the point of doing that? They will get to that point when they start getting into puberty, and that's where all this stuff kind of comes up. But why is it that they want to sexualize them when they're 10 years or younger? Why? What is the motivation behind it? Because it certainly isn't health. It certainly isn't psychological well-being. There's no positive reason to inject sexuality in that class, period. So what are the reasons that they desperately, desperately want to talk about this at a very, very young age? It is to normalize the behavior so they are more apt to be steered towards this, and they are more apt to experiment. That's the reality. When you groom young children, you slowly introduce them. You've seen all of the scientific research on this over the years on how sexual predators and priests and everybody else are able to get children. It's a slow process of normalizing certain things, destigmatizing them, desensitizing to them, and then introducing more, and then eventually the molestation or the assault happens. That's what you have to be careful of. And this Texas teacher should be kicked out of the damn classroom, because I know damn well what they're doing. And so do you. And anytime you have a judge sitting on the bench who refuses to put a pedophile behind bars because it's too easy to get child pornography right now, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. And it doesn't change the fact that each one of those photos or videos is a crime. But that is the goal. They're sexualizing your children to turn them into any sexual perversion that they want. And I'm not denigrating adults who have kinks or sexual preferences. I don't care about your sexual lifestyle. It doesn't bother me. But you don't do this to kids to artificially steer them away from how they would normally develop. And that is all this is designed to do. Take away their natural development so you can control how they develop. And that is wrong, especially when it is designed specifically to get them into this category so you build political and social clout. Folks, don't forget to hang back about 3 o'clock. So what is it, 12:30 now? 3 o'clock Eastern time. We start the radio show from 95.3 MNC on Rumble. If you're on YouTube right now, again, the link to my Rumble channel is in the description. Please click on that. head over to Rumble and subscribe there. I do not stream the radio show anywhere else but on my website and on Rumble. So make sure you subscribe here on Rumble. Hit the Rumble button. I would appreciate that. Word of the day, I don't know. I did gay yesterday. I might as well do gay today. So word of the day, I guess, in the comment section here on Rumble is gay or whatever else you want to say. I don't have a word of the day. I'm sorry. I didn't come prepared for a word of the day. I do apologize. Usually I do. I didn't have a word of the day today. So just comment below, help hack the algorithm. I appreciate that. Other than that, we'll see you back here at 3 o'clock Eastern time for the radio show from 95.3 MNC. Make sure you head over to silverfoxart.com. And don't forget, head over to this video on my Rumble channel. Make sure you're subscribed, and then scroll down and comment, and you'll be registered to win the Seal of the Usurper of the United States custom piece of wall art from silverfoxart.com. We'll